Hi there. So as mentioned today, I will present data on research carried out using a novel dispersible tablets approach for the production of pMDIs, a technology which we've called RespiTab. The data presented today is preliminary proof of concept of a Salmeterol Fluticasone combination pMDI formulation within one of the currently proposed alternative lower global warming potential propellant systems, HFA 152A. So over the last couple of years, there's been a strong push within the industry to raise awareness that the pMDI format requires another round of transition of its propellant system. The reasons for this have been well publicized in regards to environmental concerns, and these concerns have led to environmental targets such as those recommended by the Kigali Amendment of the Montreal Protocol to phase down global current HFA usage across multiple industries by some 80 to 85% by January 2047. And although HFA usage within the pharmaceutical industry accounts for a small percentage, lessons learned from the previous transition from CFCs to the current HFAs suggests it's best to act sooner rather than later. So along with the environmental issues, pMDI producers will need to mitigate supply issues of current HFA supplies as a result of regulations impacting upon the manufacturing supply chain of the medical grade propellants required for the pMDIs. This will in turn lead to reduced availability and increased costs of the current available supply. But ultimately, the goal is essentially to ensure a continued supply for patients. Therefore, initially, it may be advisable to match the performance of inhalers of the alternative lower GWP propellants to that of the existing pMDIs as much as possible. Currently, there are two main leaders as potential replacements for the current HFAs. That's HFA 152A and HFO 1234ZE. Both propellants essentially address the environmental concerns as shown in the table in regards to the low GWPs compared to the current HFAs. However, each propellant has its own limitations and complications, currently such as a lack of a toxicological data package with HFO 1234ZE. And although while HFA 152A may be further along the line in this respect, its flammable properties need to be addressed and overcome, possibly through the adaptation of current manufacturing processes. Today, I will introduce I2C's tablet approach to assist with the transition to the low GWP propellant systems. And essentially, the tablet begins as a powder formulation consisting of standard micronized APIs, in this case, salmeterol xenophoate and fluticasone propionate, blended with the excipient inhalation-grade lactose and a dispersant in the form of menthol to form a uniform blend through simple low-shear mixing. The subsequent blend is then compressed and compacted into single tablets using a standard tablet press. The resultant tablets are quality checked then for tablet weight, hardness, and contact uniformity of the APIs. The APIs in the tablet form are then dispensed into standard pMDI canisters, followed by crimping of the metering valve and pressure filling of the propellant. Upon pressure filling of the propellant, the tablet essentially disperses into its constituent components. The simplified approach to dispensing APIs initially into the canisters in the absence of propellants and allowing to pressure fill at a separate stage alone gives a lower risk assessment. So therefore, volumes that are normally required in typical preparation filling areas are no longer required. Following this version of the tablet, the APIs interact with the incorporated micronized excipients that are already dispersed and do not deposit in the lungs. The excipients improve the stability of the suspension without the requirement of ethanol or surfactants and are suitable for a range of APIs with different physical chemical properties. This novel approach produces efficient aerosol characteristics and properties that are tunable to match existing pMDI products, as will be shown in the following slides. Aerosol performance characterization of dose content uniformity and aerodynamic particle size distributions were carried out under standard testing conditions through cancer life. And testing to date have been carried out at initial time points and following pMDI storage without an overwrap, and the valve stored in the inverted position at accelerated stability storage conditions of 40 degrees C and 70% relative humidity for 1 month. As shown on the graph, the metered dose content uniformity through cancer life shows low variability following initial and accelerated time points for both Salmeterol and Fluticasone, confirming both the dispersion and the suspension stability of the tablet. Aerodynamic particle size distribution and fine particle fraction of Salmeterol was consistent through can life. Likewise was the Fluticasone distribution and aerosol characteristics. Both APIs show comparable distributions. Comparison with Seretide shows similar aerodynamic particle size distributions and fine particle fraction for both Salmeterol and Fluticasone, with further scope to closer align the deposition within the induction port by careful selection of hardware components, such as the actuator orifice characteristics. In conclusion, the data presented demonstrated a fully dispersed tablet that is homogeneously suspended within the HFA 152A propellant. The aerosol generated with the novel dispersible tablet approach shows an efficient high aerosol that's consistent and uniform and with similar characteristics to the commercial product. And in the last few months, the technology has been granted patent approval coverage in the US and all the territories within the European Union. I'd like to acknowledge the following companies, and I'd like to thank you for your attention, and feel free to ask any questions you may have.
Thank you, Cuong, for an interesting presentation. I've got probably a couple from a CMC perspective, and I think, Ben, you've also got some as well. So while we're waiting for some to come through on the feed, we can go through these if that's okay. So I guess the first question for me is, we've got lactose in there, we've got inhalation grade lactose, which presumably is in there from a manufacturability perspective. How would you, have you given any thought about how you would work that through with the regulatory agency? Because presumably from a bioequivalence perspective, you're moving away from having the same formulation and the same quantitative composition to maybe those which are currently in the current formulations. Have you given any thought about how you might address that?
I think from regulatory purposes, I think it still needs to be, I suppose, investigated, but typically it's the same inhalation grade lactose that you find in a dry powder inhaler. Essentially, as you said, we use it as twofold for the manufacturing purpose of the tablet, but also as a suspension agent. So I think in terms of the lactose itself, I think it will need probably some clinical studies, but alone going forward, some of the formulations going forward in the new 152 will have to go through those clinical studies anyway. So I don't think it'd be a problem, particularly, as I said.
So you'd probably be looking at doing quick clinical studies rather than using a bioequivalence argument.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
yes.
Great. And I think my second question probably links into it. So what happens to the lactose? Because normally, you're going to have some larger particle sizes in there. Presumably, they're going to be sedimenting. And is there any risk that they could be blocking up the valve during aerosolization? How does it work in practice? In practice,
it gets delivered along with the formulation inside the valve. We don't tend to overload with the amounts of particles that we have in the valve. We don't overload the valve capacity. It does get delivered, and essentially large, as you know, larger fractions just impact on the throat and get swallowed. It does sediment in the 152, but we found that it does aid with the dissociation of the drug itself. So the lactose does get delivered essentially, but it doesn't over compromise the valve components.
Okay, thank you. Ben, I think you've got a couple as well, haven't you?
Yeah, following up on the formulation strategy initially, I was intrigued your use of methanol. Can you explain a little bit more about the rationale for selecting methanol, not methanol, menthol?
Menthol, yes. So
menthol and what it does.
The menthol you find in I think alternative marketed products as well. So it has been used in the inhalation area. The menthol essentially is added as a dispersant. It's added to the tablet and essentially will dissolve within the propellant. So you're adding channels within inside the tablet to aid the dispersion of the tablet itself. So the compaction of the tablet, obviously, or the powder, obviously forms a hard tablet, which can be transportable. But then you need to disperse that hard tablet with the addition of the propellant. So the menthol essentially adds channels once it's dissolved off by the propellant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do I have time for one more question?
I think we've got one quick one, haven't we, on the clock? We've got one through the feed, and I think you might have already alluded to it earlier, Cuong. In your view, what's the advantage of this type of approach and this novel platform technology versus, for example, some of the more conventional methods that have been used previously for making pMDIs?
It's a simplified approach which allows you essentially to fill your propellant at a separate stage. So essentially you can just fill the can with the tablet and have a single dose of medication in there for, let's say, 1 month supply. But it also then, you have a crimp canister with the formulation inside the can, but you can then fill the propellant at a separate stage. So it reduces the risk, I suppose, with the use of 152, particularly with flammable properties of it. It's just a simplified approach which generates a good aerosol, essentially. So
what I think I'm hearing is that it's more this slightly different approach is being driven by the phys-chem properties of and the material properties of the new propellants, that they maybe need a little bit more, it's like more careful handling. And so having this approach maybe facilitates that, because you can simplify then the filling part of the process.
Exactly.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. Interesting presentation.